Have you ever felt like you were nothing more than a decoration at your own workplace? Like your entire existence was reduced to being a prop in someone else's show? Well, let me tell you about the day I realized that's exactly what I had become, and how stopping to play their game changed everything in ways I never imagined. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what matters is that this could be your story too, because what happened to me is happening to thousands of people right now, in corporate offices, fancy events, and networking gatherings across the world. This is about the moment I discovered I was being used as a human advertisement, a walking billboard of false success, and how my refusal to continue this charade finally made them see me as an actual person. I still remember the exact moment when everything clicked into place, when all those uncomfortable feelings I had been pushing down for months suddenly made perfect sense. It was at yet another company gala, standing in yet another corner with yet another fake smile plastered on my face, holding yet another glass of champagne I didn't want to drink, wearing yet another expensive outfit I couldn't really afford, when I overheard my boss talking to a potential client. He was pointing at me, at us, at the whole carefully curated scene, and he said something that made my blood run cold and my heart race at the same time. He said we were his success stories, his proof of concept, his living testimonials. But here's the thing, I wasn't successful at all. I was drowning in debt from trying to maintain the appearance they demanded. I was exhausted from the emotional labor of pretending everything was perfect. I was lonely because I had sacrificed real relationships for these superficial networking opportunities. I was lost because somewhere along the way, I had stopped being myself and started being whatever they needed me to be at any given moment. The weight of that realization hit me like a physical force, and I felt my chest tighten with a mixture of anger, shame, and something else I couldn't quite name at first, but later recognized as grief. I was grieving for the person I used to be before I agreed to play this role, before I let them mold me into their perfect puppet, before I traded my authenticity for the promise of advancement that never actually came. Standing there in that ballroom with crystal chandeliers overhead and the sound of false laughter echoing off marble walls, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. Everyone around me was playing the same game, wearing the same masks, telling the same lies, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to get away from all of it. But more than anything, I needed to understand how I had gotten to this point. How had I allowed myself to become this? When did I stop being a person with dreams and values and boundaries and start being a performance artist in someone else's production? The questions swirled in my mind as I excused myself from the event early, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely a lie because my head was indeed pounding with the weight of this new awareness. As I drove home that night, still wearing that expensive outfit and those uncomfortable shoes, I couldn't stop thinking about all the events I had attended, all the times I had been instructed to act a certain way, say certain things, project a certain image. I thought about the coaching sessions where they taught us how to stand, how to laugh, how to tell our success stories in ways that aligned with the company narrative. I remembered the suggested social media posts, the encouraged lifestyle choices, the implied dress codes that went far beyond what was in any employee handbook. This wasn't just about showing up to events. This was about performing success every single day, in every interaction, on every platform, until the performance became indistinguishable from reality, except for the fact that none of it was real at all. The beginning of this journey seems almost innocent now when I look back at it, though I suppose that's how these things always work, isn't it? Nobody wakes up one day and decides to lose themselves completely. It happens gradually, in small compromises and tiny concessions that seem reasonable at the time. I had joined the company about 2 years before that pivotal gala night, fresh out of graduate school with a degree in marketing, and dreams that were still intact, still shiny, still untarnished by the realities of corporate culture. The interview process had been intense but exhilarating, the kind that makes you feel special, chosen, like you're about to become part of something bigger than yourself. They talked about innovation and disruption and being industry leaders, and I bought into every single word because I was hungry for purpose and validation, and the feeling that my education and efforts had been worth something. The salary was good, better than I had hoped for, and the benefits package seemed generous, though I would later understand that everything came with strings attached, invisible threads that would slowly wrap around me until I couldn't move without pulling at least one of them. My first few months were relatively normal. or what I thought was normal because I had nothing else to compare it to. I worked hard, stayed late, took on extra projects, did all the things young professionals are supposed to do when they're trying to prove themselves. My immediate supervisor seemed pleased with my work, and I received positive feedback during my 3-month review. It felt like I was on the right track, like all those years of studying and interning and networking were finally paying off. But then came my first invitation to a company event. Not a casual happy hour or team lunch, but a real event. The kind with sponsors and photographers and people whose names you recognized from industry publications. I was excited, honestly excited, because I thought it meant I was being recognized, that my work was good enough to warrant inclusion in these higher-level gatherings. I spent way too much money on an outfit because I wanted to make a good impression, wanted to look the part, wanted to belong in those rooms with those people. Looking back now, I can see that was the first financial sacrifice I made for this performance, but it wouldn't be the last. The event itself was overwhelming in the best possible way at first. The venue was stunning, one of those historic buildings downtown that had been converted into an event space with soaring ceilings and original architectural details that made you feel like you were stepping back in time to an era of greater elegance and sophistication. The food was incredible, past hors d'oeuvres that were works of art, tiny sculptures of flavor that I tried to eat gracefully while holding a drink and trying to network simultaneously. Everyone seemed so polished and confident and successful, moving through the space with an ease that I desperately wanted to emulate. I felt like I had arrived, like I was finally becoming the person I had always imagined I would be when I pictured my future during those long nights of studying and writing papers and pushing through exhaustion in pursuit of my degree. But then my boss pulled me aside about an hour into the event, and that's when things started to shift in ways I didn't fully recognize at the time. He put his hand on my shoulder in that way that's supposed to seem friendly, but actually feels controlling, like he was steering me not just physically but in some larger sense, directing my path in ways I wasn't entirely aware of. He told me he was glad I had come, that he thought I had potential, that he saw me as someone who could really represent the company well. The words made me feel proud, validated, seen in a way I had been craving since starting this job. He then proceeded to give me what he called friendly advice about how to maximize these opportunities, how to position myself in conversations, how to frame my role at the company in ways that emphasized growth and success and forward momentum. He explained that these events weren't just social occasions. They were strategic opportunities, chances to shape narratives and build relationships and demonstrate the value proposition of our organization. At the time, it seemed like mentorship, like someone more experienced was helping me navigate these professional waters, sharing insider knowledge that would help me advance my career. I didn't realize I was receiving my first lesson in performance, my first script in a play I hadn't auditioned for, my first indication that my value to this company had less to do with my actual work and more to do with how I could make them look to the outside world. The first time someone explicitly told me to act successful was about 6 months into my employment, at an event specifically designed to attract potential clients and investors. By this point, I had attended maybe 7 or 8 similar gatherings, and I was starting to get comfortable with the format, the flow, the unspoken rules of engagement that governed these spaces. I had learned which topics were safe, which achievements to highlight, which aspects of my life to emphasize and which to downplay or hide altogether. I had started to notice that certain employees were always present at these events while others never seemed to get invited. And I had begun to understand that there was a hierarchy, a selection process that had nothing to do with job performance or tenure, or actual contributions to the company's success. The chosen ones, as I started to think of us, were young enough to seem energetic and forward-thinking, but old enough to seem credible and established. We were diverse enough to look good in company photos, but not so diverse that we made anyone uncomfortable or forced difficult conversations about representation and equity. We were attractive enough to be pleasant to look at, but not so attractive that we overshadowed the executives or made anyone feel insecure. We were successful enough to be inspiring, but not so successful that we threatened anyone's position or made the leadership seem less impressive by comparison. We were articulate but not challenging, ambitious but not threatening, confident but not arrogant, and above all, we were grateful for the opportunities we had been given, always ready to credit the company for our growth and development. I was, without fully realizing it, being groomed to be a very specific type of company representative, and the training was subtle enough that I thought I was just naturally good at networking and professional communication. But let me get back to that specific event, the one where the performance requirements were finally made explicit. I had arrived early, as was expected of us event participants, to help with setup and to be briefed on the key attendees and what the company hoped to achieve that evening. The director of business development, a woman named Patricia, who had always seemed intimidating and untouchable in her perfectly tailored suits and her ability to command a room with just her presence, gathered all of us junior employees in a side room for what she called a final prep session. There were 5 of us that night, all relatively new to the company, all carefully selected for reasons that would become clearer as Patricia spoke. She went through the usual reminders about talking points and company achievements and strategic goals, checking her notes on an iPad and occasionally looking up to make eye contact with each of us, ensuring we were paying attention and absorbing the information. But then she added something new, something that made my stomach turn even though I couldn't articulate why at the time. She looked directly at me and 2 other employees and said, with complete seriousness and not a hint of irony or self-awareness about how strange this request was, that we needed to act successful tonight. Not be successful, not share our successes, but act successful. The word choice was deliberate and specific, and it hung in the air for a moment while we all processed what she was asking of us. She explained that potential investors needed to see that the company was producing winners, that our training programs worked, that joining this organization was a pathway to prosperity and fulfillment, and the achievement of professional dreams. She told us to talk about our career growth with enthusiasm and energy, to mention the opportunities we had been given with a sense of gratitude and amazement, to emphasize how different our lives were now compared to before we joined the company. She even suggested specific phrases we should use, actual scripted lines that we were supposed to work naturally into conversations, stories that were based in truth but exaggerated and polished and stripped of anything that might seem negative or concerning or complicated. She wanted us to mention the mentorship we had received, the skills we had developed, the connections we had made, the doors that had opened for us since joining this organization. And we were supposed to do all of this while making it seem spontaneous and genuine, while acting as though these thoughts and feelings were arising organically from our authentic experience rather than being carefully constructed talking points designed to sell a narrative. I stood there listening to these instructions, nodding along with everyone else because that's what you do when someone in authority is giving you directions, and I felt something inside me rebel against what was happening. There was a voice in my head, quiet but persistent, asking what I was doing, questioning whether this was really what professional success looked like, wondering if this was the career I had worked so hard to build. But I pushed that feeling down because I wanted to be a team player, wanted to be seen as someone who could handle responsibility and rise to challenges, wanted to continue being invited to these events because I thought that's what career advancement looked like. So I went out into that event and I acted successful. I smiled brighter than I felt, laughed at jokes that weren't particularly funny, made meaningful eye contact that suggested depth and connection even when I felt completely hollow inside. I told sanitized versions of my professional journey that made everything sound easy and natural and inevitable, as though success was simply a matter of showing up and working hard and being in the right place at the right time. I talked about challenges I had overcome without mentioning the mental health struggles that had accompanied them, the nights I had spent crying in my apartment, the moments when I had questioned whether any of this was worth it. I discussed my graduate education without mentioning the student loan debt that kept me awake at night, the mounting interest that made me feel like I was drowning before I had even really started my career, the constant anxiety about money that colored every decision I made. I described my lifestyle in ways that suggested financial comfort and stability, without revealing that I was living paycheck to paycheck, that I had started picking up freelance work on weekends just to afford the wardrobe these events required, that I was eating ramen most nights to save money but posting pictures of the occasional nice meal out to maintain the illusion of prosperity. I was, in every sense of the word, a performer, and I was getting better at it with each event, each conversation, each carefully constructed narrative about who I was and what my life looked like. Playing this role became a second job, one that required constant vigilance and energy and emotional resources I didn't really have to spare. Between the actual events themselves, which were happening with increasing frequency as I became better at performing, and therefore more valuable as a company representative, there was the ongoing maintenance of the image I had created. This meant curating my social media presence to align with company values and aesthetic preferences. Even though nobody had officially told me to do this, it was just understood through implicit communication and social pressure and the observation of what seemed to please my supervisors. I found myself taking photos of my breakfast if it looked sophisticated enough, arranging my coffee and croissant in aesthetically pleasing ways that suggested a lifestyle of leisurely mornings and refined taste rather than the reality of grabbing whatever I could eat quickly before rushing to the office. I started checking in at trendy locations I couldn't actually afford to frequent regularly, visiting these places once and then posting about them as though they were part of my normal routine. I posted about books I was reading and podcasts I was listening to and thoughts I was having, all filtered through the lens of what would make me seem like the kind of person the company wanted to be associated with, someone who was cultured and informed and constantly engaged in self-improvement and professional development. My actual friends, the ones I had before joining this company, the people who had known me when I was still figuring out who I was and what I wanted, started to comment that I seemed different. They said they didn't recognize me in my own posts, that I sounded like a corporate press release rather than a human being with real thoughts and feelings and experiences. They asked if I was okay, if the job was too much, if I needed to talk about anything. I laughed off their concerns at first, told them they were being dramatic and reading too much into things, insisted I was just being more professional and mature and focused on my career. But deep down, in moments of quiet that were becoming increasingly rare because I was always busy with work or events or maintaining my online presence, I knew they were right. I was disappearing into this character I had created, losing touch with the person I had been, forgetting what I actually enjoyed or believed or wanted because I was so focused on projecting what others expected to see. The exhaustion was profound and all-encompassing, seeping into every aspect of my life until I felt like I was perpetually running on empty, like I was operating at a deficit that I could never quite make up no matter how much I rested or slept or tried to take care of myself. I would come home from events physically drained from hours of standing in uncomfortable shoes and smiling until my face hurt, and being constantly on alert, monitoring my words and my body language and my facial expressions to ensure I was always presenting the right image. But more than the physical exhaustion, I was emotionally depleted from the constant performance, from the unending need to be someone I wasn't, from the mental energy required to remember all the details of the persona I had constructed, and to keep my real thoughts and feelings carefully hidden beneath layers of professional polish. Have you ever had to pretend to be happy when you were miserable? Comment below and tell me about it, because I need to know I'm not alone in this experience. The mask I was wearing started to feel heavier with each passing month, like it was slowly crushing me under its weight, suffocating me beneath layers of pretense and performance that I could no longer distinguish from my authentic self. The demands escalated in ways that seemed gradual at the time, but looking back were clearly part of a systematic process of molding me into exactly what the company needed me to be. It started with suggestions about my appearance, comments that were framed as helpful feedback but felt increasingly controlling and invasive. Someone mentioned that I might want to consider a different hairstyle, something more polished and professional. Another person suggested that my wardrobe could use an upgrade, recommending specific brands and stores that were well beyond my budget, but supposedly more aligned with the image the company wanted to project. I was encouraged to join a gym, not explicitly because of how I looked, but because wellness and fitness were values the company promoted, and it would be good for me to embody those values visibly. Each suggestion came with the implicit understanding that compliance would be noticed and rewarded, while resistance would be noted as a lack of commitment or cultural fit. Beyond appearance, there were suggestions about my social life and personal interests. I was encouraged to develop expensive hobbies that would give me common ground with clients and investors, things like golf or wine tasting or travel to specific destinations that were popular among the demographic the company was trying to attract. When I mentioned that these activities were financially out of reach for me, the response was always the same, that I should think of them as investments in my career, that the money I spent now would pay dividends later, that success required sacrifice and vision, and a willingness to bet on myself. What they didn't say, but what I was beginning to understand, was that they expected me to go into debt to maintain this performance, to leverage my future earnings to create a present reality that would make those future earnings possible. It was a circular logic that trapped me more securely with each decision I made to go along with it. My credit card debt was mounting steadily, the numbers growing larger each month as I tried to keep up with the expectations and requirements of my role as company representative. I bought clothes I couldn't afford, attended events I had to pay for myself despite the fact that I was there for work purposes, invested in professional development opportunities that were supposedly optional but felt mandatory, given the culture and expectations. I was living in a constant state of financial anxiety, checking my bank account obsessively, calculating and recalculating how I was going to make it to the next paycheck, but I couldn't let any of this show because showing struggle would undermine the entire performance. I had to act successful even as I was drowning in the costs of acting successful, a cruel irony that wasn't lost on me, even as I felt powerless to change it. My mental health was deteriorating in ways that I tried desperately to hide, not just from my colleagues and supervisors but also from myself, because acknowledging the depth of my struggle would have required me to confront some uncomfortable truths about the choices I had made and continued to make. I started having panic attacks, sudden episodes where my heart would race and my breathing would become shallow, and I would feel convinced that something terrible was about to happen, even though rationally I knew I was safe. These episodes usually happened before events, my body's way of rebelling against what my mind was forcing it to do, but sometimes they would come out of nowhere, triggered by something as simple as seeing an invitation in my email or hearing someone mention an upcoming gathering. I developed insomnia, lying awake at night replaying conversations from events, analyzing everything I had said and done, worrying about mistakes I might have made or opportunities I might have missed. My thoughts would spiral in these dark hours, questioning everything about my life and my choices, but then morning would come and I would push those thoughts aside and put on my professional face and go back to performing because I didn't know what else to do. The physical symptoms intensified as well. I had constant tension headaches that made it difficult to concentrate. My shoulders were always tight and painful from the stress I was carrying. My stomach was perpetually upset, and I had developed a nervous habit of clenching my jaw that my dentist warned was going to cause serious dental problems if I didn't find a way to stop. I went to the doctor multiple times, convinced that something was physically wrong with me, that there had to be a medical explanation for why I felt so terrible all the time. But the tests always came back normal, and the conclusion was always the same, that my symptoms were stress-related, that I needed to find ways to reduce the pressure I was under and take better care of myself. The irony was that the stress was coming from my job, from this performance I was required to maintain, but I couldn't reduce that stress without jeopardizing my career. Or at least, that's what I believed at the time. I was trapped in a situation that was literally making me sick, but I felt powerless to change it because I had invested so much in getting to where I was, had sacrificed so much and worked so hard that the idea of walking away felt impossible. Everything came to a head at an event about 18 months into my tenure at the company, one of those elaborate affairs that the organization threw periodically to celebrate milestones and impress stakeholders and reinforce the narrative of success and innovation that we were all supposed to embody and promote. The venue was even more impressive than usual, a modern art museum that had been rented out for the evening, and the guest list included some genuinely important people in our industry, the kind of individuals whose presence validated the company's status and trajectory. I had prepared for this event more carefully than usual, not just because of its importance, but because I had been explicitly told that I would be featured in some capacity, that there would be opportunities for me to share my story and experiences with key stakeholders. I had practiced my talking points, rehearsed my anecdotes, made sure my outfit was perfect, and my appearance was polished, and my entire presentation was exactly what the company wanted it to be. But as the evening progressed, something started to feel different, wrong in a way I couldn't quite articulate, but that made me increasingly uncomfortable and anxious. I noticed that I kept being steered toward the same small group of people, potential investors who were considering a significant financial commitment to the company, and it became clear that my role for the evening was to be a living testimonial, a walking success story who could personalize and validate the pitch that the executives were making. I was supposed to talk about how the company had transformed my career and my life, how grateful I was for the opportunities I had been given, how much I had grown and developed under their guidance and mentorship. And I did all of that. I played my role perfectly, hitting all the marks and saying all the right things and projecting exactly the image I had been trained to project. But there was a moment, a specific interaction with one of the potential investors that cracked something open inside me. He asked me, with what seemed like genuine interest and curiosity, what my life had been like before joining the company, what I had been hoping to achieve when I started this job, whether my actual experience had matched my expectations. It was a simple question, asked conversationally during a lull in the broader discussion, but it hit me with unexpected force because it required me to access parts of my authentic self that I had been suppressing for so long. I started to answer with my practiced script, the sanitized version of my background and aspirations that I had told so many times it no longer felt like lying. But something in his expression, a kindness or sincerity, or maybe just basic human interest, made me pause. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, which was absolutely unacceptable given the setting and my role, and I excused myself quickly, claiming I needed to use the restroom. I practically ran to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and broke down completely, sobbing quietly while trying not to make noise that would attract attention or concern. I looked at myself in the mirror after I had regained some composure, really looked at myself for the first time in months, and I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. Everything about my appearance, from my hair to my makeup, to my clothes, to the expression on my face was curated and constructed and fake. I had become a living prop, a carefully designed visual element in someone else's marketing strategy, and the realization was devastating. I thought about that investor's question, about who I had been before all of this, about the dreams and hopes and values I had once held, and I couldn't remember. I couldn't access those parts of myself anymore because I had buried them so deeply beneath layers of performance and pretense that they might as well not exist. I felt an overwhelming surge of anger at the company for asking this of me, at myself for agreeing to it, at the entire system that treated people as commodities and performances as more valuable than authentic humanity. But I also felt something else, something that would prove to be more powerful than the anger, a deep and profound clarity about what I needed to do. I needed to stop. I needed to stop performing, stop pretending, stop sacrificing my authentic self for the approval and validation of people who didn't actually care about me as a person, but only about what I could do for them. I needed to reclaim my life and my identity and my sense of self before I lost them completely, before the performance became so entrenched that I could never find my way back to who I really was. The decision to stop attending events wasn't made lightly or quickly, despite that moment of clarity in the museum bathroom. I went back out to the event that night and finished my performance because I didn't know what else to do, because decades of conditioning about being professional and reliable and following through on commitments were stronger than my desire to simply walk out and never look back. But something fundamental had shifted inside me, and over the following days and weeks I couldn't stop thinking about that moment when I hadn't recognized myself in the mirror, when I had realized how completely I had disappeared into this role I was playing. The next event invitation arrived about 2 weeks later, a corporate mixer scheduled for a Thursday evening, and I stared at it for a long time trying to decide what to do. Part of me, the part that had been trained and conditioned over the past 18 months, immediately started thinking about what I would wear and what stories I would tell, and how I could use this opportunity to further cement my position as a valued company representative. But another part of me, the part that had broken down in that bathroom, the part that still remembered who I used to be before all of this, felt physically sick at the idea of going through it all again. I thought about the financial cost of these events, the emotional toll, the way they drained me of energy and authenticity and joy. I thought about the person I was becoming, or rather the person I was losing, and I asked myself a question that should have been obvious but somehow hadn't been until that moment. What was I actually getting out of this arrangement? What had I gained from all these performances and sacrifices and compromises? I had been promised career advancement, networking opportunities, valuable experience, but when I looked at my actual position within the company, I realized that nothing had changed. I was still in the same role I had started in, with the same responsibilities and the same salary, despite all the extra work I was doing as a company representative. The only thing that had changed was the amount of my time and energy and money that I was expected to invest in maintaining an image that benefited the company but did nothing for me personally. The realization was both liberating and terrifying because it meant that stopping wouldn't actually cost me anything in terms of real career progression, but it also meant that I had been giving so much of myself for nothing, that all those sacrifices had been pointless. I decided to test the waters cautiously, to see what would happen if I started setting boundaries and reclaiming some control over my time and energy. I responded to the event invitation saying that I wouldn't be able to attend due to a prior commitment, which was technically true because I had committed to spending that evening taking care of myself and starting to rebuild the parts of my life I had neglected. I expected immediate pushback, questions about what could possibly be more important than this event, pressure to rearrange my schedule and make it work. But the response I got was surprisingly neutral, just a brief acknowledgement that I wouldn't be there, and a reminder to let them know if my plans changed. It was anticlimactic in a way that was almost insulting, suggesting that my presence wasn't actually as crucial as I had been led to believe. Emboldened by this relatively easy first refusal, I declined the next invitation as well, and then the one after that. Each time got a little easier, though I still felt anxiety and guilt and fear about potential consequences. I was waiting for someone to confront me, to demand an explanation, to make it clear that my continued employment was contingent on my attendance at these events. But weeks passed, and nothing happened. I continued doing my actual job, meeting my deadlines, contributing to projects, and nobody said anything about my absence from the social and networking aspects of company life. It was as though I had been performing in a play that nobody was actually watching, as though all that effort and sacrifice had been for an audience that didn't exist, or at least didn't care. The silence that followed my withdrawal from the event circuit was strange and unsettling in ways I hadn't anticipated. On one hand, I felt an enormous relief, like I had been carrying a weight I didn't even realize was there until I set it down. My evenings were suddenly my own again, and I could spend them doing things I actually enjoyed, rather than things I was obligated to do for the sake of appearances. I started reconnecting with old friends, the ones I had neglected during my time as a company representative, and it was both wonderful and painful because they welcomed me back without judgment, but I could see in their eyes how much I had changed, how far I had drifted from the person they remembered. I started engaging in hobbies and activities that I had abandoned because they didn't fit the image I was supposed to project. Simple things like reading for pleasure and going for walks and cooking meals at home, instead of always eating out or ordering in because I was too exhausted to do anything else. I started dressing in ways that felt comfortable and authentic to me, rather than ways that would impress potential clients or investors, and the relief of just being myself in my own clothing was profound. But alongside this relief, there was also a growing anxiety about the professional consequences of my choice. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to call me into their office and express concern about my recent absence from events, to question my commitment to the company or my interest in advancement opportunities. I played out various scenarios in my head, preparing defenses and explanations and justifications for my decision. But the conversation never came. The silence felt loaded with meaning, like everyone knew something I didn't, like there were discussions happening behind closed doors that I wasn't privy to. I noticed that I was receiving fewer emails about upcoming events, as though I had been quietly removed from certain distribution lists without any formal announcement. I wasn't sure if this was because they had accepted my disinterest or because they were punishing me through exclusion, making me irrelevant through deliberate oversight. The ambiguity was maddening, and there were moments when I was tempted to reach out and ask directly what was going on, to force a conversation that would clarify my status and position. But I held back because I realized that by asking, I would be signaling that I cared, that I wanted back in, and the truth was that I didn't. I was happier without the events, healthier without the constant performance, more myself without the pressure to be someone I wasn't. My panic attacks had decreased in frequency and intensity. My sleep had improved. My physical symptoms had started to fade, all of which suggested that stepping back had been the right decision regardless of any professional consequences. But the internal struggle was real and ongoing because I had been so deeply conditioned to believe that success meant visibility, that career advancement required networking and relationship building and being present at the right places with the right people. Removing myself from that world felt like self-sabotage even as it felt like self-preservation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow failing by choosing my well-being over my career ambitions. I started to wonder if maybe I had been wrong about everything, if maybe the problem wasn't the company or the expectations but me, my inability to handle pressure or meet challenges or do what was necessary to succeed in a competitive professional environment. These thoughts would spiral in moments of doubt, usually late at night when I was alone with my thoughts and my fears. But then I would remember that moment in the bathroom mirror, remember the person I didn't recognize, and I would know that whatever else happened, I had made the right choice for myself. They finally noticed my absence about 3 months after I had stopped attending events, though the conversation that resulted was not at all what I had expected or prepared for. I was called into a meeting with Patricia, the director of business development, who had first explicitly told me to act successful, and I walked into her office prepared for confrontation, for criticism, for some kind of reckoning about my recent behavior and choices. I had rehearsed various responses, trying to find a way to explain my position without burning bridges or jeopardizing my employment, though at this point, I wasn't entirely sure I cared about keeping this job if it meant going back to the way things had been. Patricia was sitting at her desk looking at her computer when I entered, and she gestured for me to sit without looking up, a power move that I recognized but that didn't affect me the way it once would have, because I was no longer invested in her approval or validation. When she finally turned her attention to me, her expression was difficult to read, something between curiosity and frustration, and possibly respect, though that last one might have been wishful thinking on my part. She asked me directly why I had stopped coming to events, no preamble or small talk, just a straightforward question that demanded an equally straightforward answer. I took a breath and decided to be honest, really honest in a way I hadn't been with anyone at this company in the entire time I had worked there. I told her that I had realized the events were making me miserable, that the constant performance was affecting my mental and physical health, that I had been spending money I didn't have to maintain an image that wasn't authentic to who I was. I told her that I felt like I had been used as a prop, as a visual element in a marketing strategy, and that I was no longer willing to play that role regardless of what it might cost me professionally. I expected her to get defensive or angry, to deny the characterization or to tell me I was being dramatic or unprofessional, but instead, she was quiet for a long moment, just looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Then she said something that completely surprised me. She said she had noticed a change in the quality of my actual work over the past few months, that my project contributions had improved significantly, that I seemed more focused and creative and engaged. She said that several people had commented on it, that my direct supervisor had mentioned it in their regular check-ins, that there had been discussions about promoting me to a more senior role with greater responsibilities and better compensation. I sat there stunned, trying to process what she was saying because it contradicted everything I had believed about how success worked in this organization. She continued, saying that she had reviewed my file and realized that I had been attending events at a much higher frequency than was typical or expected for someone at my level, that somehow the system had evolved in a way that placed unfair demands on certain employees while others coasted by with minimal participation. She acknowledged, though not quite apologizing, that the company had perhaps been unclear about what was required versus what was optional, and that the culture around these events had become somewhat toxic and performative in ways that weren't serving anyone well. She said they were reevaluating their approach to employee participation in networking and business development activities, trying to create more balanced and sustainable expectations. And then she said something that made everything click into place in a new way. She said that my actual value to the company was in my work, in my skills and creativity and contributions to projects and teams, not in my ability to charm potential investors at cocktail parties. She said that the events were useful for certain purposes and certain roles, but that they had been overemphasized and overutilized as measures of employee commitment and potential. She said that my decision to step back had actually highlighted some important issues that the leadership team needed to address. I left that meeting feeling a complex mixture of vindication and anger and relief and regret. Vindication because my choice had been validated, because I had been right to trust my instincts about the toxicity of the situation. Anger because it shouldn't have taken 3 months and a near breakdown for someone to notice and acknowledge the problem. Relief because I wasn't going to be punished or fired or relegated to some professional purgatory. And regret because of all the time and energy and money I had wasted, all the damage I had done to myself in pursuit of something that turned out to be neither necessary nor beneficial. The aftermath of that conversation changed my relationship with the company and with my own career in fundamental ways that I'm still processing and understanding. I did receive that promotion Patricia mentioned, a move to a senior role that came with increased responsibilities and significantly better compensation, enough that I could finally start paying down the debt I had accumulated during my time as a company representative. The irony wasn't lost on me that I achieved career advancement only after I stopped trying to advance my career through the methods the company had implicitly encouraged. My new role was focused entirely on actual work, on projects and deliverables and measurable contributions, and while it was challenging and demanding, it was also fulfilling in ways that the events had never been because I was being valued for my authentic skills and abilities rather than my ability to perform a certain type of success. I still attended the occasional company event, but on my own terms and with clear boundaries about what I was willing to do and how I was willing to present myself. I dressed in ways that felt authentic to me. I told stories that were honest about both successes and struggles, and I refused to participate in the kind of performance marketing that had nearly destroyed me. Interestingly, this authenticity seemed to resonate more with people than the polished performance ever had, and I had several conversations with potential clients or partners who appreciated the realness and honesty of my approach. It made me wonder how much of the performance had ever been necessary, whether the company's success had come despite, rather than because of all that careful image management and strategic positioning. I also started having conversations with other employees, particularly younger ones who reminded me of myself when I first started, about the pressure to perform and the importance of setting boundaries and maintaining authentic selfhood, even in professional contexts. I learned that many others had experienced similar feelings of being used or exploited or pressured to be something they weren't, but most had never spoken up because they assumed it was just part of professional life, just what you had to do to succeed. Some of them thanked me for making it okay to step back, for demonstrating that you could prioritize your well-being without destroying your career, for showing that authenticity might actually be more valuable than performance. These conversations were healing in their own way, helping me process what I had been through and find meaning in the experience beyond just personal growth. My relationship with social media changed as well. I stopped curating my online presence to project a specific image and started posting things that were actually meaningful to me, sharing thoughts and experiences that were messy and complicated and real. I lost some followers, mostly professional connections who apparently preferred the polished version of me, but I gained others who appreciated the authenticity and honesty. More importantly, I stopped feeling like my online presence was another performance, another obligation, another way I was constantly being evaluated and judged. The financial recovery has been slower than I would like because debt is much easier to accumulate than to eliminate, but I've been making steady progress, and more importantly, I'm not adding to it anymore by trying to maintain an unsustainable lifestyle. I've learned to find joy and satisfaction in things that don't cost money, to measure success in terms of personal growth and genuine relationships, rather than expensive possessions or impressive experiences. Looking back on this entire experience, I can see now how close I came to losing myself completely, to disappearing so fully into a performance that I might never have found my way back. The realization is sobering and a little frightening because it happened gradually enough that I didn't recognize the danger until I was already deep into it. I think about all the people who are still trapped in similar situations, performing success while drowning in debt and despair, maintaining images that are slowly killing them, and I want to reach out and tell them that there's another way, that authentic selfhood is more valuable than any career advancement, that they deserve to be seen and valued for who they really are, rather than who they can pretend to be. So let me ask you something, and I really want you to think about this and comment below with your honest answer. Have you ever felt like you had to pretend to be someone you're not in order to succeed? Have you ever sacrificed your authentic self for professional advancement or social acceptance? Have you ever looked in the mirror and not recognized the person staring back at you? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I want you to know that you're not alone, that what you're experiencing is real and valid and worth addressing. Understanding this kind of pressure and its effects is so important because it's happening everywhere, in every industry, at every level, and we need to start talking about it openly and honestly if we're ever going to change it. If this story resonated with you, if it touched something in you or made you think about your own experiences in a new way, please leave a like on this video because it helps me know that sharing these vulnerable and difficult stories is worthwhile. And please subscribe to Living Through It for more stories like this. Real experiences from real people who are navigating the complexities of modern life and work and identity. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future videos where I'll continue to explore these themes of authenticity and performance and the cost of success as it's currently defined in our society. Your engagement and support mean everything, and I'm grateful to everyone who has taken the time to listen to my story and reflect on their own experiences. Remember, you are valuable exactly as you are, without performance or pretense or polish, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve access to your authentic self. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.